When you think medieval combat, you think swords. Knights in shining armor, clashing blades, dramatic duels. But that's Hollywood. Real medieval warfare was chaotic, brutal, and dirty, and the sword was actually one of the least used weapons on the battlefield. In this video, we're going through every single weapon category used in real medieval combat, what it was, how it was used, and why it existed. Let's get into it. Let's start with the most important weapon in medieval warfare, and it's not the sword. It's the spear. Cheap to produce, easy to train with, and devastatingly effective in formation. A spear gives you reach. You can kill a man before he ever gets close enough to swing at you. The spear became the pike, longer, sometimes up to 6 meters, used in tight formations called phalanxes or schiltrons. Thousands of men, shoulder to shoulder, bristling with pikes pointed outward. Cavalry charging into that didn't stand a chance. The spear and pike weren't glamorous, but they won more battles than any other weapon in the medieval period. If you were a common soldier, this was your weapon. Now the sword, the most iconic weapon of the Middle Ages, and also the most misunderstood. Contrary to what movies show you, swords were expensive. Only knights and wealthy soldiers carried them. A sword cost the equivalent of several months' wages for a common man. There were multiple types. The arming sword, one-handed, worn at the hip, used alongside a shield. The longsword, two-handed, longer reach, built for power and precision. And the hand-and-a-half sword, also called the bastard sword, versatile, could be used one- or two-handed depending on the situation. Here's what most people don't know. Medieval sword fighting was a science. There were entire fighting manuals called Fechtbücher, written by masters like Johannes Lichtenauer, detailing exact techniques, angles, footwork, and counters. It wasn't wild swinging. It was calculated, technical, lethal. And when plate armor became too strong to cut through, knights flipped the sword, grabbed the blade with a gauntlet hand, and used the crossguard as a hammer. That technique is called mordha, murder stroke. Medieval fighters adapted. Always. The axe is older than the sword, cheaper to make, and in many ways more practical on a battlefield. You don't need years of training to swing an axe effectively. That made it the weapon of choice for infantry who couldn't afford a sword. The Dane axe, a long-handled axe with a wide crescent blade, was the signature weapon of Viking warriors and later Norman soldiers. It had massive reach and could cleave through shields, limbs, and light armor in a single blow. The battle axe evolved throughout the medieval period, becoming shorter and more compact for use alongside a shield, or staying long for two-handed devastating power. Simple, brutal, effective. By the High Middle Ages, plate armor had become so advanced that cutting weapons were struggling to deal damage. You couldn't easily slash through steel plate. So the solution was simple. Stop trying to cut through it. Start crushing it. Enter the mace. A heavy metal head on a shaft, designed to transfer blunt force directly through armor. It didn't need to penetrate, it just needed to deform the metal and the body underneath it. The war hammer took this further. One side was a blunt hammer face for crushing. The other side was a spike, called a bec de corbin or crow's beak, designed to punch directly through plate at weak points. Visors, joints, gaps between plates. The war hammer was essentially an armor-opening tool. These weapons were so effective that even high-ranking knights and clergy carried them. The idea that bishops used maces to avoid shedding blood with a blade is mostly myth. They used them because they worked. If the spear was the most used weapon, and the sword was the most iconic, the halberd was the most versatile. A halberd combined 3 weapons in one: an axe blade for slashing, a spike on top for thrusting, and a hook on the back for pulling mounted knights off their horses. It gave infantry a real answer to cavalry. You could thrust to keep a horse at distance, hook the rider to dismount them, then finish with the axe. One weapon, 3 functions. Polearms in general, weapons mounted on long poles, dominated the medieval battlefield in various forms. The glaive, the bill, the valge, the ranseur. Each region and era had its own variation. But the principle was always the same: give a foot soldier reach, leverage, and multiple ways to kill. Swiss and German mercenaries armed with halberds were some of the most feared infantry forces in 14th and 15th century Europe. Ranged weapons changed medieval warfare completely, and 2 stand above the rest. The English longbow was a masterpiece of low-tech engineering. Made from a single piece of yew wood, it could launch an arrow over 200 meters and penetrate chainmail at close range. English and Welsh archers trained from childhood. Their skeletons literally show bone deformities from years of drawing a bow that required up to 80 kilograms of draw weight. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, around 6,000 English troops, most of them archers, destroyed a French force 3 times their size. The longbow did that. The crossbow was different, slower to reload, but devastatingly powerful and requiring almost no training to use effectively. A peasant with a crossbow could kill a knight who had trained his whole life. That's why the Pope banned it in 1139 against Christian opponents. It was considered unchivalrous. Enemies didn't care. They kept using it. Both weapons fundamentally shifted power on the battlefield away from the armored elite and toward organized, trained common soldiers. The dagger was the weapon everyone carried and nobody talked about, but in close quarters, it was often the most dangerous thing on the battlefield. When 2 armored fighters ended up in a grapple, which happened constantly, the sword became nearly useless. Too long, no room to swing. The dagger was perfect. Short, stiff, and designed to find the gaps in armor. The visor, the armpit, the back of the knee, the groin. The rondel dagger was specifically built for this, a stiff, narrow blade with a round disc guard, made to be gripped and driven through armor gaps with full body weight behind it. Medieval fighting manuals dedicate entire sections to dagger fighting, grappling, and how to take an opponent to the ground and finish them. Every soldier carried one. Knights carried one. It was the last resort, and often the deciding factor. Last but not least, the shield. Most people think of it as purely defensive. It wasn't. The shield was an active weapon. You used it to bash, to pin, to unbalance, to blind your opponent. A shield bash to the face could stun or break a nose. Hooking your shield behind an opponent's leg and pushing could take them to the ground. In formation fighting, shields were used to physically drive the enemy line backward. Shield design evolved constantly throughout the medieval period. The round Viking shield, the kite shield used by Norman cavalry for leg protection on horseback, the heater shield of the high medieval period, smaller, lighter, easier to maneuver. As plate armor improved and covered more of the body, shields got smaller and eventually disappeared from the battlefield entirely by the late 15th century. When you didn't need a shield anymore, it meant your armor was good enough to take the hit. Medieval combat wasn't about one weapon. It was about the right weapon for the right situation. Spears to hold a line, swords for dueling, axes for raw power, maces and war hammers to crack armor, halberds to stop cavalry, bows to break formations from a distance, daggers to finish the fight up close, and shields to control the space in between. Every weapon existed for a reason. Every weapon solved a problem. That's what made medieval warfare one of the most complex and brutal systems of combat in human history. If you want a deep dive on any single weapon, let me know in the comments. And subscribe if you want more content like this.